Hi, this is AVG TV, where tutorials are made simple. Now, this is a special request from someone who apparently doesn't know a lot about computers. So basically, this is a way of making computers faster, or the hardware, the special components on your motherboard. Things you gotta look out for is whether your computer has all four SATA ports and no IDE. Now, this computer apparently has both IDE and SATA. Now, the thing is about this motherboard is that that's a factor that this motherboard is outdated. Another way you can tell whether it is outdated is the components on the actual motherboard. You can tell by the RAM that this RAM is really thick and that it even feels kind of old. Now, the best way to tell whether this RAM is basically out of date is sometimes you can type in the code or the model number of this special hardware. It'll either tell you what type of RAM it is, and I'm pretty sure for the fact this is DDR1, and that's about it. Now, DDR1 is pretty outdated. Now, this is PC3200 RAM. Now, another factor you can tell is usually if you want a fast computer, usually the number, this is a 3200, I don't know if you guys can see that, but usually the higher the number is usually the faster and how fast the RAM is. Now, if this is 3200, and if I were to go down to, let's say for example, 2200. Now, 2200, I know it's probably a made up number, 2200 is slower than 3200. Now, if you want something really fast, you gotta think about, let's say 6400 or 12800, with 128 two zeros at the end. Now, the currently up-to-date RAM for today is DDR4. Now, most computers nowadays that are fairly new use DDR3. That's another one to tell. And a lot of times you can tell by the hardware. Now, you can tell by this hardware that it is outdated. Now, we have the parallel, which is basically used for the old printers. We have the PS2 connectors, which is basically used for the old PS2 mouse. We have a video composite. We have a serial connection, which is mainly not even used anymore. And we basically have our basic these. Now, USB today is still usable. Ethernet is still used today, and the audio is still used today. Most computers today usually either have an HDMI connection. So, we can already tell that the newer stuff doesn't have this, or this. Sometimes they have a built-in VGA or built-in HDMI. And this is basically an example of an outdated motherboard. Now, the components used on motherboards can also slow down the computer. Now, this is basically an Ethernet LAN connector PCI card bus. Now, this is a wireless PCI card bus. Now, usually which is faster? We already know that LAN is always faster because you're connecting directly to your modem. Now, add-on cards on your car can also slow down your computer. Now, usually no one uses this anymore. This is a line, meaning dial-up. So usually computers with no PCI cards are usually generally faster. The less hardware, the less time it takes for it to boot up, meaning faster. So usually if you want a really fast computer, you got to think about the hardware components. Now, another thing that can slow down the computer is the speed of the hard drive and size. Now, the faster and the smaller the size, the better. Now, this, an example, is a SATA. Now, SATA is usually newer than IDE. IDE is really outdated. It uses the ribbon cables for your hard drive. Another factor you got to look out for is the router, or the speed of your modem. This is a fairly new router. Usually the faster the router, the faster the internet. So usually it all depends on the hardware. The better, the better. If you plan on using your LAN card, you gotta remember, There's two different types of cables you gotta worry about. There's patch and then there's crossover. Now crossover is basically a cable that basically allows you to have internet if you're connecting from computer to computer, which is basically called ad hoc connection. Now another one is called patch. Now patch cables are basically used for computer to modem or computer to router. Now these are basically examples of crossover and patch. Now the one I am holding in my hand is basically called a crossover cable. The only difference about these cables is the wiring. Now usually inside of these are basically little wires. Now usually they're flipped when you disconnect them or you rewire them. Now if you plan on doing it this way, you gotta remember you need two LAN cables, or they're basically another name for them is called patch cables. Now usually you have one cable hooked up from your card to your router. Then you have another one which is basically hooked up to the internet port of your modem or router. Now another way you gotta remember is if you want to have faster modem connections, you gotta remember about the firmware. Firmware can easily be updated using the USB port. Another way to make your computer faster based on internet is opening up ports, which is also known as TCP or UDP, for your firewall or router connections. Which is basically, you can also go on a website called portforwarding.com. The same with laptops can also determine whether it is outdated or not. Another great factor to tell from laptops is even though that they are different than desktops, you can easily tell by either the processor. You can also look at the sticker on the front of your laptop to tell you the processor. Now this processor is a Core 2 Duo. It is somewhat new, somewhat not. Now another great factor we can tell is by looking up the model number of the computer. This is basically an Inspiron 5250, I think. And this laptop is pretty old. You can easily tell by basically the product key. Now if the product key has a Windows Vista sticker, you can already tell that this is an already outdated machine. Now another way you can tell is by undoing the back and simply taking out the RAM and looking up the model number of the RAM sticks. Now you can also tell by the RAM size too whether it is outdated or not. This is a 4 gig memory, which is basically DDR3. Now there's other RAM sticks too that look like this, but they are different. Either they have the edge over way in towards the middle or all the way over here. Now if it's like this, it is DDR3. Usually this little gap or this little gap in between is either somewhere else. It's either DDR1, 2, or 4. Now this is DDR3. And another way to tell if your computer is outdated is simply by typing in the command dxdiag. That is dxdiag in your command prompt cmd.exe under your computer. Some laptops do not have built-in DVD-ROM drives. Now this is basically a solution to this problem. Now there's basically ways you can bypass it by doing this. You can simply buy a SATA enclosure and take apart the enclosure and take out this little circuit adapter, which is basically USB to SATA. Now you can simply tie it in like this by putting them together. Now the way to tell is that this is a male and that this is the female end. Now usually the opposite adapters usually attract. Now you have basically a cable with an end like this. Now the one that's thinner is just the power, and the one that is thicker is the data. Now most DVD-ROM drives that are fairly new have slimline SATA. If your DVD-ROM drive does not have an end like this, it is not compatible. Now the best way to tell is by buying an adapter. Now they have many adapters. This is basically a slimline SATA to SATA. Now these have ends that are like that. Now you can simply put them together as so. Now this basically is a great way to bypass that I don't have a DVD-ROM drive in my laptop. Now basically the budget for this thing is basically the DVD-ROM drive you can simply pull out of any old laptop. This adapter you can simply get for maybe about $5 off Amazon or eBay. Now the enclosure is about $20. Some of them come with 3.0 cables. Now under the command prompt to tell whether your computer is outdated or not, is after you have typed the command, you can simply, if it has either 64-bit or 32-bit. 64-bit is newer, 32-bit is old and outdated. Now this is another tip if you want to have faster internet. Now usually cable companies do this. Usually you see one of these splitters in the backyard connected to your modem outside your house. Now usually the splitters they use are called three-way splitters. Usually they have 3 of these on one side and 1 of these on top. Now this is another tip. Now if you're like me and you only have internet, meaning you don't have the bundle, meaning you don't have telephone or cable, you can simply buy one of those adapters, basically to RF, male to male. Now usually they have an ends that are like this. One end has this, one end has this, meaning they're not splitting. Now this is basically a little education. Now usually when you read on here, notice how it says a negative 3.5 dB. Now, a lot of them are balanced and some of them are not. You got to remember, when you have cable running in through here and out to your devices, you got to think of it this way. Yes, you are getting your data, but it's not going out as strong throughout the connections. Now, the splitter makes it weaker. Now, that's why there's negative 3.5 and negative 3.5 over here. Now, if this was just a single, it would really not do anything. It wouldn't weaken the signal, and it's fairly strong. Now that's another tip. Now you can simply buy one of those adapters and simply connect your internet directly to your modem this way. Which means you gotta take off these splitters and put on a double-ended RF connector. That's another tip for you. And even you can also upgrade your internet service to either from Comcast to Verizon, since Verizon has optic Fios, which is basically the fastest so far. Alright, now that I talked about the components and hardwares on ways of making your computer faster through components, let's talk about cell phones. They're basically a computer also. They're basically handheld and they fit in the palm of your hand. Now, another thing you gotta think about, yes, these Android phones are basically computers, but you gotta think about the hardware and what really runs it. Now, what is Android? Well, Android is a Linux-based OS that runs on your phone. And Linux is basically used throughout a lot of devices and a lot of things. Now, you gotta know the vulnerability list for which is the weakest OS and which is the strongest OS. Now, Linux is ranked number 1. They only have 13 known viruses. Now, when you think about Macintosh, it is a Unix-based machine, another form of Linux in a sense of way. Now, Windows is basically a DOS. Now, since it does run exe files, a lot of devices today, a lot of people use Windows. Now, you wonder why there's a lot of viruses for Windows? Well, that's your reason, because it is the most used OS today. Now, a lot of corporations use Linux because it is the safest and more secure, and there's not a lot of great applications for them because not a lot of people are writing to them. Now, the best that I know of OS today that people use a lot is Ubuntu. It has the basic Office and so forth for education. Now, enough of talking, and let's start tweaking your phone for making it fast. Now, notice how my phone has no widgets on the screen. Now, you can simply tap it and basically to delete the widget and make sure you have no widgets on your phone. That can also slow it down. Now, we can simply go on to our apps menu and simply scroll over to settings. Now, a lot of phones can do this if you don't know this. If you want to figure out how to enable developer options, just click on the About phone. You can simply scroll all the way down and hit build number at least 7 times or more. And then when you keep tapping it, eventually it will unlock developer mode. Now, on some phones, you can simply hit the back button and notice how you unlock developer mode. Now, this is the best way to set up your phone to prevent identity theft or so forth. Now, you gotta remember, there's things you gotta disable and things you gotta enable. Now, things you gotta check is don't keep activities. That's another thing. And remember where it says background processes. Things that are running in the background even though you're not using them. I recommend checking no background processes. Now, when you leave an app, check this to not keep the activities running. When I leave it, it should exit it completely. Another thing you gotta disable is disable the HW overlays. The more things that are disabled, the faster your phone. Now notice how your phone has transitions. When you click on an app, you notice a transition kind of slows it down. Now you can simply change that. You can simply click on these and hit animation off. So when you click on an icon, it'll immediately go to it without having a little bit of a delay. Now I've disabled all my transitions, and then we can simply scroll up a little more. And the one thing you should really have checked is allow mock locations to prevent hackers from knowing your actual location when you post stuff. And that's basically all you need to know about tweaking your phone to prevent it from being hacked or so forth, whatnot. Now another thing you gotta look about is the apps. How many apps do you have running on your phone? That can also slow down your phone. Now another thing we can do is uninstall a whole bunch of apps and simply download a couple apps. Now the app I like is called Ccleaner. It is also used for Windows and is ranked one of the top 10. Now when you run Ccleaner, notice how my phone is fairly clean. I'm not using a lot of data. Now it even tells me the RAM and how much RAM I have. Now we can simply click right here and notice how you can kill tasks this way also. You may not be able to see it very well, but it has the options of App Manager, System Info, Settings, Help, and Rate this app. Now you can simply hit Analyze, and it will analyze all the stuff that can be deleted. Now you can also set it up so it will not delete your downloads folder or certain things that you don't want deleted. Now you can also analyze and it will delete it. Now notice how I have my cache, my history, my clipboard item, my browser history, the call log. Now the call log is another thing we gotta clean. A lot of times people have text messages that basically take up space on your phone. Now we can basically check this button and click clean. Now the most I've cleaned on my phone was basically around almost 600 megabytes worth of data that was deleted. Now another thing that people always have this trouble is the amount of pictures you have on your phone. This is another issue. A lot of people have too many pictures on their phone and apparently it's taking up too much space. Usually you gotta export those photos and basically burn them onto a DVD so they won't take up space on any of your devices or hardware. Pictures can slow down your computer also if you have too many. Now another thing you can do is basically if you go into your settings and you click on apps, you can simply clear the data of one of the apps. It's not going to uninstall it, it's just going to remove like the cache and so forth. Like for example my browser. Now if we click on Google Chrome, our browser, or whatever browser you have, you can simply hit clear data. Now it'll completely remove all of the accounts and all saved passwords and so forth. And notice how you freed up a lot of space on your phone. Now other apps also have this problem is YouTube. Now YouTube can also use up space too. These are all great ways of making your phone faster. Now even if you go to messages, you can simply delete all those messages. And you can also go on your call log. Your call log can also take up stuff too. You click on the phone icon, and usually on the lower left hand corner you see a bunch of voicemails and stuff. You can simply click on them and delete them. Those are all great ways of making your phone faster since it is a computer. Now for the next step for this tutorial, we're going to be talking about software. There's a lot of free software out there that can help speed up your computer. Now to find the best software, usually it's best to go to the maker's website or commercial website with the N saying .com or .org. In this tutorial I'm going to be using Windows 10. Now Windows 10 is the newest OS as of today. If you haven't gotten your Windows 10, you can simply watch my tutorial on the bottom on how to get it, or a quick link on to get it yourself. Simply uses a media creation tool to get the ISO. Now, before we get started with this tutorial for the software, it usually is best to have a clean install of Windows, or whatever your OS is. Now, usually it's recommended to have an extra hard drive so you can back up your stuff on a hard drive, using an adapter such as this, like I mentioned before, for the CD-ROM drive. Now, it's usually recommended to have this flash drive, or a flash drive of any kind. Now, as long as it's more than at least 2 gigs or so, you're good. Now, you can simply download my rescue kit, which is basically in the download link description below. It's basically called Tools or whatever. Now, usually there's things in here called Driver Magician. Now, with Driver Magician, you can simply back up your drivers before reinstalling your OS. Now, once you reload your OS, you can simply pop back in your flash drive and run the portable app called Magician, and simply just run it and click Restore Drivers. Now, notice how you don't have to reinstall all your drivers, and that's a big headache. Now, also in this flash drive of the toolkit is that there's a thing called 3DP chip. It's basically a driver finder that uses the internet to help find your drivers without the need of headaches or hassle. Now, another thing you gotta look out for is that make sure your product key matches your OS. Now, you can simply find torrents online using uTorrent or BitTorrent, and make sure you have download the correct OS ISO to match your product key in order to make it genuine. Now, a lot of times people would download the ISO of the OS they do not have, and they would end up with a screen that says not genuine Windows, and they would ask you constantly for a product key. Now, other things you can look up too is that in my download description there's a thing called EasyGig 2 Cloner. Now, just in case before you do any of this, if you have an extra hard drive that's about the same size as your actual hard drive in your computer, you can simply clone it to another hard drive in case something happens during the clean install of your Windows OS, or afterwards to prevent any data loss. Now, another thing I'm going to include is a Hiren's boot CD. Now, this CD is a live CD, meaning it only works when you first boot up the OS. Now, with that in mind, you can reset Windows passwords. Now, I do not know if this works for Windows 10, but it's worth a shot, isn't it? Another thing too that you might want to check is the components on the front of your computer. Now, some computers have floppy drives. Now, you can simply take those out since no one really uses them anymore. You can also disable some things in the BIOS to prevent certain things from popping up. Now, you can simply disable floppy drive. You can also set your primary devices from CD as primary, and you can also set up your hard drive as secondary. Now, other things you can also set as third or last is simply the net, or your wake on LAN is simply another thing you can disable.
Hi guys, welcome to the tutorial of AVG TV. Today we're going to be talking about the software and things that are going to be needed to tweak your computer to make it somewhat faster. Now, this is basically Windows 10. It's basically, if this tutorial will work for all Windows machines. Now, another thing that we want to do is install a few programs. Now, these programs are under my download link description down below. Now, the first program we're probably going to install is probably our Ccleaner. Now, we can basically click on it and double click it. And when we run the install setup, we got to do a few things. First, we got to read. Now, a lot of times people don't like to read, and they wonder why they get programs on top of what they don't already want. Now, under here, we can simply uncheck the Add Desktop shortcut and leave everything as is. Now, we can always do Advanced to make sure that it is installed for everyone to use this computer. Now, next, then we simply hit the Next button. It's fine. And we don't need that, so it's basically an install as of right now. Now, this program is really good. We can simply clean the registry. We can also clean off any unneeded data or space that can free up for other programs to make it run smoothly. Now, we're not going to run any of these programs just yet. We're basically going to install every single one first. Now, our next program is called Defraggler. Now, Defraggler is a great program. It'll replace the built-in defragmentation, which doesn't really appear to do anything. Now, again, we can simply uncheck this since I already know for a fact that having icons on your computer can also take up space. Now simply hit the install button and it should install Defraggler. And just give it a few. Now we can again uncheck all this stuff and hit finish. Now it's always recommended if you want to disable your internet and to replace your antivirus, you can do that. Now as long as your computer is not connected to the internet, you should not be getting any viruses, as far as I know. Now we can basically double click on here for antivirus. Now I'm not too picky at the moment whether my internet is disabled or not. So we're going to run the setup. And again, it's going to take a few. And just give it a few minutes. Yeah. Alright, for the next step, we're going to simply click, whatever your language is, simply click next. Now, you always want to read all this stuff because it's always important to know what the law, or if you are basically violating it or whatever. But anyway, just click accept. And since we are using the antivirus free, we need to check the basic protection since this is really all we have. Now the other one is basically called full protection. Now that one usually costs money, so we like the free route. Now we should get a license key like that. Simply hit the next button. And under here, we always want to do a custom install because a lot of times they'll throw in programs you don't necessarily want on top of what you're already doing. Always do custom. And next. Now again, this is telling me what it's going to be including in the here. Now I just want email protection. I don't really want all this web stuff. But anyways, additional installed. I guess we're fine. So just click next. And whatever we don't want, we can always uninstall it using Ccleaner. So I guess now in the meantime, we can just simply minimize it to the taskbar. Now we can basically slide this over on stuff we've already installed to see what we have left to install. Now we've already installed these programs, so next we just have left with these. Now we can simply double click on Spybot. Now Spybot is a really great tool. It basically is like antivirus, but it pretty much detects it within the registry, or it detects any DLL that the antivirus does not detect. Now again, we can simply hit next, next, and always do the second one, never do the first one. We want more control. And we can hit accept, next, 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 install. Now this program doesn't take long to install, so we can simply leave it down here for a little bit. And we can drag this over here for what we have already done. Now this folder is basically called registry hacks. Now these are basically things you can double click, but it'll add it to your registry if you open up your regedit and hit import. Now these are basically regedit hacks to basically modify some things on your computer, such as the delay time. And basically you can also disable certain things. Now the enable balloon tips, a lot of times in the lower right hand corner you'll get these little balloon icons that pop up saying give you tips and whatever. And this is automatically set to disable, which is 0. Now you can do all this stuff by yourself manually, or you can do it my way, which I have it set up so it's easy for you by just double clicking on it, so it's easy. Now the enable prefetcher, basically it's a prefetcher. It prefetches data using your browsers and whatnot, and it takes up space. Now that's basically set up to 0, so these are already all disabled. Now the hover time is basically the delay time for when you click on an icon. It basically is like delay. You know, you can delay it to like a minute. It'll take a minute to basically transition. Now, this is menu show delay is basically the same thing. When you click on an icon, that's how fast it pops up. Now, you can tweak that if you want. And the wait kill service is another thing. Now, my other thing just popped up. So basically, we're going to uncheck this and click finish. And we're going to minimize this. And it looks like our spybot already finished. So we can basically uncheck this and check for new spyware malware signatures. That's always good to know. Now, this is currently updating your antivirus. This is also updating as well. So basically, we can minimize these. And the last thing that we want to do is defragmenting. But the next thing we're going to do first is simply right-clicking on your recycling bin. Notice how you have a thing called Open Ccleaner. Now that's really useful. Now just open Ccleaner. It should pop up. Now when you first have Ccleaner, there's going to be things unchecked. Now I like checking them all because, you know, it's easy. And these are optional. You can always uncheck these or check these. These are just saved passwords on your browser. Now, network passwords, do not check that. The reason why is because if you do check that, well, if you have Wi-Fi, it'll remove the password and you gotta type it in all over again. Now let's scroll on down and let's check all these. Now under the advanced, we're gonna check every single one but the bottom two. So sometimes when you click on these, a warning will pop up saying whatever. Just click the enter button and just keep doing this. So when another error pops up, do the same thing. Click your enter button. And enter, enter, enter. Now these are all checked. Now we click on the applications tab. We pretty much do the same thing. Just check everything. And that's about it. Now under registry, we can always hit scan for issues. It should scan for issues on the computer for things that are no longer in the system. When you uninstall or reinstall a program, a lot of times the computer thinks it's still registered in the machine. So these are things we gotta fix. Now yours may have a lot more than mine, so just click fix selected issues and hit no, and fix all. The next thing for this tutorial we have to do is uninstall any program that you find unnecessary, such as toolbars. Now toolbars are malware, they're adware, they're definitely viruses. Now you can uninstall anything that looks suspicious, but everything I have here does not look suspicious. Now we can do it in a startup, and usually the only things you should have on startup is simply your Wi-Fi, and this is something you can disable. And the only things you should have enabled is your Ccleaner, your antivirus, your drivers for either your graphics or your audio, and of course your Wi-Fi. Now for internet, disable everything. For Google Chrome, you can't really disable any of these. So under here is perfectly fine. If you have this many, you're good. Anything else, disable. So that's about it. Now under settings, you can set this up so that it can clean right when you boot up the computer. So that's basically good, right? Now you can hit run computer when the computer starts. That way you don't have to keep opening it up and cleaning it. So we're going to check that. And under here, I like going number 3 passes. So it's basically going to write over it 3 times to make sure it's gone. Now these, I think we can check and make sure it's on C because that's our main drive. And under cookies, we can simply, these are cookies on the computer, and these are cookies to keep. Now, I say we get rid of all these cookies. And these are all the ones it's going to delete. Now, under monitoring, we're going to check that. It's going to basically, it's going to monitor your system, and it's going to pop up saying, oh, you should clean your computer. Just clean it. And under the advanced options, we can click minimize the system tray and close program after cleaning. You can also set it up so that you can clean it after it's shut down. And you can check this, older than 24 hours. You can click delete. That's if you want. And that's about it. We have everything basically set up. Now we can basically go over here and click analyze. Now it's going to analyze everything that can be deleted, such as extra stuff that doesn't have to be on there. And just give it a few. Now in the meantime, we can minimize this, just check our other things to see if they're done or not. Now everything looks good right here. Now do not click this because it's going to have you install extra stuff, so we're not going to worry about that. The only thing you should worry about for this software is the scan now. Now I'm pretty sure there's ways you can manage it where you can have it so you don't have to have it, you have to keep clicking on it in order to do it. Now I'm pretty sure there's ways to do it. Now we can double click on it and we can run it every time we boot up the computer. Run computer when system starts is perfectly fine on me. And that's pretty good. Now run it when the computer starts. That's the same for Ccleaner. Now everything here looks pretty good. Now we can check this because it's going to report it to the actual company, so when someone else gets a similar virus, you know, they're less trouble because you're the one that reported it. Now everything looks pretty good. We're going to hit save. And next startup. So good. Now hit the back button. You can hit the scan now and it should scan the system for viruses, and if it finds any you can fix them that way. So we're going to minimize it for right now. Now this is Spybot. Now Spybot is a great tool. You can just click update and it should update the program, so any other new viruses that are out, it pretty much finds it basically as a database, and right now it's checking for the most common issues for viruses. Now let that do its thing, and I guess we can minimize that. I guess we can double click on the Spybot search and destroy, and from right there we can just hit no, I don't need help right now, and hit cancel. Now the next thing we have to do is click immunization. Now this is the #1 thing whenever you always install a new OS, a new whatever. Now we're going to hit check system. It's going to basically check the most common threats that are commonly known in browsers. And let us do a thing, and it's going to ask you to apply it. Now do it. Now either it'll say that you have a lot of entries that are left unprotected, so you want to apply the fixes. And just give it a few. And another thing, another tip we should also learn is hit the Windows key on your keyboard. It should look something like this. I don't know if you can see it, but it has a little Windows icon, like a circle. If you have the Dell keyboard, just click on that, and while you're holding down on it, find the pause button on your keyboard. Hit that, and you should have another thing that pops up calling basically your system settings. Now, under your system settings, this is another way you can tell how much processor speed your computer really is. Mine is a 64-bit 4GB Athlon 2 2.7 processor. Now we're going to click under Advanced System Settings. And under here, under Performance, we're going to click on Settings. Now, usually when you first install a computer, or the default is always Adjust for Best Performance. Now what we're going to do is click Adjust for Best Performance. Click that and click OK. And click OK. And we're going to simply click the Exit button. And now it's saying that all of them are now immunized, so we can exit that. We can exit this. And under here we can exit this. You can scan it if you want, or on the reboot it'll do it too. Now under the registry tweaker we can check we can double click on all these, and a message should pop up. Just say yes to every single one. Now if you want, you can do it manually, meaning you have to go on the internet. I'll provide the link down below so you can figure out how to do it yourself. Now these are just shortcuts on how to do it. And so far we're doing pretty good. Now the next thing we have to do is go into the Start menu and go under My Programs. Try to find the thing called Command Prompt. It's basically a little terminal, and usually you can find it under Windows Accessories, I think. If it's not under there, it's probably somewhere else. Now, I think mine is under Windows System, and sure enough, there it is. Now click on Windows Systems, and I want you to type in msconfig, that's msconfig, and basically hit the enter button on your keyboard. Now, just give it a few minutes and a thing should pop up. Now, under Startup, or actually under Boot, you should see a thing like this. Now, under Timeout, the default is 30. Now, I say we do half that, meaning 15. And just click Make All Boot System Settings Permanent. Then click the OK button. And this is basically the command I mentioned earlier, dx-diag. Now, this is another way you can check your computer to see the rig of it. And again, it says my specs right here. I have my BIOS is this, my processor is that, and so forth. And just click Exit. Now that we have all these programs installed, we can simply delete all the shortcuts to all these programs. Now, the next thing we have to do is again close this. Now let SpyBot do its thing. Now once it's done, you can do a full system scan under the SpyBot Search and Destroy Start Center. Now there's one more thing we have to do. Now under our Google Chrome or your internet browser, I recommend Google Chrome. I recommend a clean install of Google Chrome. Now I want you to double click on the browser. Now there's some secret settings in there that you can access to simply make it somewhat faster too. Now set as the default if you're using a clean install. Now go under over here and basically go under the settings on here, and you can simply download the AdBlock Plus. Now the AdBlock Plus, you can simply download it by typing in the browser AdBlock Plus and enter. Now it's usually one of the first couple links. Now one.org, this is it. Now simply click on it and click install for Chrome. It should add it to Chrome and you should get a thing like this. Now remember all those annoying pop-ups? Well, it's going to block them. So, great, right? Now another thing we have to do is go back under the settings tab and click under settings. Now under here we can set the pages to google.com and click OK. Now we can simply scroll on down and we can uncheck certain things and scroll down even more. Under the advanced options, we're going to scroll down even more. Now we can simply clear the browsing data and we can uncheck every single thing under here, but the only thing we should check is the enable phishing and malware protection. And another thing you can check is basically the prefetch resources. That'll basically help pages load up quickly. And click go under network, change proxy settings. Under here, go under LAN settings. And under here, this should already be checked, but we're going to uncheck it. Make sure these are unchecked and click OK. Click OK. Now your browser is pretty much set. Now, this is pretty much all we have for this tutorial. Now, we're pretty much almost done. Now to wrap things up, since we already ran the Ccleaner, we have left yet to run the defraggler. Now, defraggler is really good. I like it. So basically, we're going to scroll on down and click on defraggler and run it. Now, it's always recommended to go under settings and options. Now, try to find something that says replace Windows defragmenter. Check that box. And under here, minimize to tray. Then click OK. Now under settings, click shut down after defrag. And under actions, click analyze the drive. and click yes. Now it's basically going to reorganize everything on your hard drive to make it run somewhat faster. Now once it analyzes, you see all these red blocks? Those are actually bad. Now I don't have a lot, so just hit the defrag button. Now let the computer shut down and reboot, but for this instance I'm not going to shut it down just yet. And for the SpyBot, if you want to run that, you can simply do that too by clicking the Start Center. And you can simply click System Scan. This is another great way of checking for any more viruses on your computer. And you can click Update, and you can hit disable any of the cookies that tells you to disable. And once this is done, you can hit Start System Scan. Now once you start the full system scan, it will say it found some errors. You can click Fix All, and that's about it. Now I sure hope this tutorial helps you in any sort of way. So you can always subscribe to Andrew Golden TV at ANDRWKOLDEN TV at YouTube. And I hope this tutorial helps you. Now, thanks. Now, thank you for watching my video, and hit the subscribe button.